Good morning and Shabbat Shalom and welcome. This is Rabbi Ed Feinstein and Valley Beth Shalom Torah study for a Shabbos morning, joined this morning by my dear friends and colleagues, Rabbi Sherry Hirsch of the American Jewish University and Rabbi Mark Gelman of the Rabbi Mark Gelman Institute of Southern Florida and Rabbi Emeritus of Temple Beth Torah of Melville, New York. Thank you both for being with me this morning. I think before we launch into our conversation about Torah this morning, we have to turn our thoughts and prayers to what's going on in Israel. Yes, there are all sorts of complications in the Middle East, but right now there is a simple reality and a simple moral story that Hamas has launched 2,000 rockets indiscriminately at civilian communities in Israel for the sole purpose of killing Jews. The sole purpose of killing Jews. And that has to bring a tear to the eye, and it has to bring a deep heaviness to our hearts. So whatever the policy issues are and whatever the negotiations are and whatever our feelings about Israel's direction, we have to think very carefully about children who are sleeping in shelters tonight, children who are scared, families that are holding on to their kids. Because this is a very, very scary time. And we can debate the policy, certainly, and there are lots of policy debates to be had once the rockets stop falling. But for this moment, let's turn our thoughts in that direction and pray that peacemakers find a place and that somehow we can push back this horrifying violence and bring a moment of reflection and peace to that region of the world. So thank you for thinking with us. This is it's a recurring story, and we've heard it again, and it's easy just to say it's not important. I mean, I listened to the radio, and I don't even think it was the third news story. Yet another war between Israel and the Palestinians, and yet for those of us who have family there, those who have friends, colleagues, teachers, for those of us who see the state of Israel as one of the central points of our Jewish lives, our heart lives there. This is such a painful moment, and we acknowledge it together. So thank you. This Shabbos, of course, is the beginning of a new book of the Bible, Shabbat Bamidbar. And we're reading the beginning chapters of the book of Numbers, the census that Moses takes on the eve of leaving Mount Sinai and continuing the journey. But the other thing about the Shabbos, of course, it's the Shabbos, the last Shabbos before Shavuot. Shavuot, the holiday of first fruits, the holiday of the revelation of Torah, will begin on Sunday evening. It is the extension of Pesach. Pesach gave us freedom from bondage. Shavuot gives us the freedom to imagine the sacred society and the holy personalities we are to shape. Pesach is freedom from, Shavuot is freedom to. Pesach is the release from slavery. Shavuot is the vision of the world that we can create, following God's law and God's direction. So let's begin with that conversation. Traditionally, Shavuot is seen as the day or the commemoration of the giving of Torah on Mount Sinai. Mark, how do we understand that as a modern person? What it means to gain revelation from the divine, and what does it mean to have that kind of experience? Let me just put it in a really blatant, horrible way. If a person stands on the corner of, in my neighborhood, Ventura Boulevard and Sepulveda, Sherry's neighborhood, say Wilshire and Westholme, and declares himself a prophet of God, we call 911. They give him a shot of Haldol. They put him in the hospital for a week or two, and he feels better. And yet we open this story and we say, we are the recipients of God's word on Mount Sinai. How are we to understand revelation when we see it in our own experiences as a function of psychosis?
Okay. It's about viewing a house when you're in a meadow, and there's a house at the end of the meadow, and it's obscured by trees. But you can see through the trees a little bit, enough to see that there's a house there. And the wind is blowing the leaves, and so it blocks out parts of the house that sometimes are revealed when the wind blows in another way. I think that's exactly the way the Torah was revealed. It is revealed in a way that shows us God and God's will for us in the world. But it shows it to us in a mottled way, the way shade happens when it goes through trees. It blocks out some of the words of the Torah itself. Words like, he shall rule over you, in the story of the Garden of Eden, and that Adam and his descendants who are men should rule over women. It's blocked out in laws about slavery. It's blocked out in laws about the rebellious son, and it's blocked out in laws about homosexual. These are words, as Martin Buber said, I cannot hear God in these words. I can't hear them. Those are the parts of the house that are obscured by the leaves. And the leaves are the accretion of ancient prejudices. Prejudices against all sorts of people that we're still trying to work out 2,000, actually 4,000 years later. And so to see the parts that we can't hear God is only part of the story. The other part of the story are the parts of the house we can see clearly. Treat the stranger in your midst as if he was a citizen among you, and love your neighbor as yourself, and don't murder, and don't steal. The purity of those moral teachings are so evident that it's obvious to me that they were revealed by God. It was also obvious to other philosophers. Immanuel Kant understood it, even though the proofs through the medieval proofs he didn't believe in. The truth is, we could not evolve that kind of morality on our own. If we were just materialistic beings, if we were just animals, we couldn't evolve a moral way. We couldn't understand right and wrong. A lion who eats an antelope is driven by impulse, by instinct, not by any morality. We raised guide dogs for the blind, and if we left a hamburger on the counter and walked out of the room, that hamburger was going to be gone because the dogs were going to jump up on the counter and eat it. And I told them, look, it's morally unacceptable for you to eat our hamburgers, and so you can't do it. It never got to them because they're dogs and they can't evolve that. And so the key is not people who sit back with their arms folded and they say, okay, prove to me that God, the God of the universe, revealed something to us. No, you prove to me that some materialistic being can evolve a moral code without it being revealed. It had to be revealed because there's nothing in nature that supports moral judgment. As Wordsworth says, nature so red in tooth and claw. It's red in tooth and claw, meaning it's the strong eating the weak. And as Hobbes said, it's homo hominis lupus. Each person is the wolf of the other, because he couldn't believe in the moral code that we had inherited. So, from my point of view, Pesach isn't enough. Pesach is enough to have a people, but it's not enough to have a faith, a religion, an Am Kadosh, a Goyatzum Barav. It's not enough to make a great and religious and spiritually luminous people. For that, you need Sinai. So for me, Shavuos is the key to all of the other holidays, because without it, we aren't a faith. And it reminds us that we cannot develop morality without God's help.
Thank you. Sherry, how do you read this story? How do you read the story of Revelation? What revelation means? God revealing, God.
So I thought you were going in a totally different place, Mark, which you started with the assumption that God gave us Torah. And I started actually prior to that assumption, which is what actually happened at Sinai, right? Was that actually true? And was there an exchange of wisdom? Or is that a story that is part of our narrative, and that the evolution of our people came through divine word, through humankind, right? Like, I started one step back from you, which is I actually, and I know I could be an epicurus. Is that the correct word? I always get that one mixed up, but I could be an epicurus, epicurus, by saying that I don't really care if that actual story happened, and I don't actually think it happened. I think it is a incredible story. I mean, I love telling that story, especially when my kids were little. I'd love like sitting them and telling it to them as a bedtime story. Then there was smoke, and then there was fire. Then everybody separated. I mean, it got really exciting, you know, and my youngest would just, his whole eyes would light up. And then what happened? And then he came down and he saw the golden calf, and, you know, he was so betrayed. And, you know, that story to me is a great story. But is that revelation? No, not to me. What I think revelation is this ongoing conversation that we as a people have with God that challenges us to live a moral life. And that's happening all the time, right? It's ongoing, that we are hearing God's voice in the way that we live out our lives. And some of us are more open to it, some of us are more closed to it. But the idea that we are constantly being revealed to by God is how I sort of live my life. That the possibility of that we can be better than we were yesterday, to me, is the ongoing revelation. So that's the origin story, but that's about it. And whether it's true or not so interested. What I'm interested in is, am I open, and are we open as a community to continually hearing God manifest in our world? And that's what revelation is to me. And what I think Shavuot is a reclamation of saying, I'm open, right? Despite all the things that happened this year, despite how crazy our world is, and this year in particular, I could say Shavuot forces us to say, I didn't just survive, I now see possibility. I'm going forward with this venture to discover God in my life. So I think it's a reclamation of all that. Very different than where you started.
Well, so then when I read Torah, I'll ask each of you this question. When I read scripture, when I read Torah, am I reading God's words? And what does that mean to say these are God's words? Gelman.
Yeah.
If I read Torah, am I reading God's words?
So there's a letter, I'm trying to find it, but there's the exact words, but there was a correspondence. People don't do that anymore, but they used to. Good friends would do deep conversations over letter writing. And the correspondence between Buber and Rosenzweig is one of my favorite correspondences. And in it, Buber asks his friend Rosenzweig, do you think the Torah is a fairy tale? And Rosenzweig writes back, he said, well, if you should ask me now, I virtually memorized the quote. If you should ask me now, is the Torah a fairy tale? I should probably only utter the platitude, yes, it is a fairy tale. However, at that moment, when the Torah is being read in the synagogue, at that moment, well, it is not a fairy tale. And if you ask me, what is the content of that revelation? I tell you, my dear friend, the content of the revelation is the revelation itself. And he came down, Rosenzweig says to his friend Buber, and God came down, it says in the text. That is the revelation. Oh, and already, when it says, I am, he says that is the beginning of interpretation. So this beautiful, beautiful letter is a way of saying the entire Torah is the interpretation of an ineffable moment, a moment that cannot be reduced to words. And yet the Torah is words. But it isn't only words, like the house behind the trees. there's something there. And that something there is the revelation from God. Now, you either take it seriously, you either take God seriously, and not the God of Aristotle, who is the noesis noiosis, the thought thinking itself, as Aristotle said, or you would think of God as the unmoved mover, another phrase that Aristotle invented, or you believe in the biblical God who connects with us. And there are various ways that that connection can occur. But in the end, Judaism is a religion that takes God seriously. And all of the versions of Judaism, I have to say, sadly, Reconstructionism and sort of the Kaplanian idea that has so much resonance in your shul and through Mordecai Kaplan and his influence on Harold. Those versions to me leave me cold because they don't engage the power of believing in a personal God. Now, I think we have gone too far in some cases in personalizing this God. Some of the places I go, now that I'm not always on the pulpit in my own shul, I hear sermons from rabbis that begin like, "Hey God, it's Chuck, I'm here. How you doing? Did you have a good week, God? I'm good. I had a good time. Did you have a good time, God? Are you doing good? Because I love you, you love me. Come on, please." That kind of informality with the God who is going to take your life someday. I was just reading a story of a nun, Sister Alethea, born in Tulsa. She was part of the Order of St. Paul's, and her thing is memento mortis. Her spiritual regimen is thinking about your death. And she has skulls all over her death to remind her that everyone's going to die and every human head will become a skull. So we have to understand that God is doing that to us. The God who says, you can't call that God, "Hey, Chuck." There's, "Hey, God, it's Chuck." You can't do that. You have to have a sense of awe and a sense of fear, actually fear in that God. So a personal God isn't just someone who's going to tell you, God, do you like the blue dress or the green dress? This kind of personal intimacy is completely out of place in the God we worship. And yet the complete Deus absconditus, the God of Aristotle, who's totally uninvolved in the world, that's not us either. What we are is the golden mean. We are right in the middle of that. We're between a materialism, which has no God, and a God who is completely removed from human projects.
Sherry, how do you read Torah in that sense? When you read Torah, do you read a record of revelation? Do you read a word from beyond, a word that's godly?
Well, it's so interesting because I was listening to Mark and thinking to myself, like, I have such a different feeling about God. And that's what's so powerful, is that our relationship with God can be so intimate, so personal. One of my favorite things is I think there's 88 names for God in the entire 5 books of the Torah, and there's only 500 words used again and again. So almost 1/5 of them are dedicated to this idea that we don't know God, and each one of us has our own personal connection. So that's very powerful for me. When I read the Torah, I'm not sitting there thinking to myself, "Oh, I'm listening to God's words. I should pay attention." I'm sitting in a community of people that share a story and a peoplehood and that gather. And to me, this is one of the rituals we do to enact who we are, right? It's to reinforce who we are. So I don't feel like I'm listening to God's words. What I feel like I'm listening to is the inspiration of a certain time period of Jews that wrote down what they think happened. And maybe they were divinely inspired. I assume they were, but I think we're also all divinely inspired. So I don't think they're unique to us. And what I'm listening to them is our retelling, our story that's bringing us together and keeping it alive. So for me, it's like when you say, Mark, we can't have a personal relationship with God, I want to push back on you hard and say, why not? Right? Like, why not? Why can't I talk to God about bicycles and parking spots and all that kind of stuff?
Well,
since when is God limited in what God can hear and what God's available to? Like,
that's a wonderful question. I didn't mean we can't have a personal relationship with God. Quite the opposite. We must have a personal relationship with God, but it can't be casual.
Why?
It can't be casual because our relationship with God is a life and death relationship. It isn't a kind of a relationship you have with a casual friend. That isn't the relationship we have. And this is the God who judges our life.
But I couldn't get up in the morning if every day I interfaced with God that this is life and death. Like, yes, I think that is true. And there's a level to which I just need to wake up in the morning and live my life. Like, if I live in fear and awe that God is going to take my life today, like, I'm not leaving the house.
Why?
Right?
There's another option. And that is to make of your life the days that God gave you and gives you as meaningful as they can be. The idea that,
but not because I'm under pressure from God,
is the truth, Sherry.
But not because I'm under pressure from God holding a death over me and saying, Sherry, make it count, and like, that's just not how I live.
Can I mediate this?
Then there's the God who requires of you no accountability. And I can't worship.
I'm not saying a God of no accountability. I'm an observant Jew. I'm not talking about a God of no accountability. Go ahead, Eddie.
No, I was going to mediate this a little bit because I really appreciate the debate, by the way, because we've been doing this now for a year, and it's about time we came to this, because really this is some of the essence of what we've disagreed with or debated over the course of this year, and it's quite remarkable. I want to thank you both. I'll ask you both this question. You both are married to people for a long time, where you've had children together. Mark's had grandchildren. Do you treat your spouse casually? Hey, Chuck, how's it going? All right. I think that there's a difference between a casual relationship and an intimate relationship, right? I have an intimate relationship with my wife, with Nina, but it carries a certain degree of respect and even reverence, even when I'm not at my best. She'll tell you that I wouldn't treat just an old pal on the street. I think there's a certain sense of presence, of somebody who matters to me in a very deep way. And while I don't think it's in terms of Mark, I'm afraid of dying, I think it's love. It's a quality of loving respect. I spent 30 years with Harold Schulweiss, my teacher. First of all, I couldn't call him Harold for the first 10 years until he kept insisting on it. So I had to develop a new habit, because he was always the rabbi. He was my rabbi, you know? So it's a question of, how do you treat your teacher? How do you treat your spouse? How do you
I think that's an important linguistic change that you've just mediated, Eddie, which is casual is not what I was referring to. Intimate is what I was referring to.
I believe that.
And in intimacy, true intimacy, you can talk about anything. And know that the other person, right? Then the other person can forgive you. They can understand it. Like, in real intimacy, you're unveiled. Really, you're unmasked for the moment in time. So it's not casual. It's not like, hey, dude, what are you doing, God? It's intimate. It's like, I can tell you that my deepest, intimate, most things, and I will not be judged by you. Or if you are judging me or disappointing or whatever, that we can actually work through that. That's different. That's intimacy.
I can ask for help.
Yes.
I can confess my weakness and ask for help. I can confess my failure and ask for tshuva.
And God can hear me when I am feeling casual. Like, God, dude, I'm like totally over this, right? Like that God has the capabilities for that. Maybe it's not the way that I bring myself to God because I want to prepare myself, but God can hear all that. God's big enough for that.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think what's missing in that, if I would push back on what I think is provided by, let's say, a thicker theological understanding than you're offering, which is awe, something like awe. I mean, I have an intimate relationship with God. I definitely do. I have an intimate relationship with my wife, but I'm not in awe of my wife. And my wife didn't create the heavens and the earth, and my wife isn't going to take my life, and my wife isn't the source of all morality that has created Western civilization. She isn't the author of that. God is the author of that. And that's where the human metaphor breaks. It breaks because if the only metaphor we can use in our relationship with God is our relationship with other people, we end up worshiping people. And that is the opposite of what Judaism as a faith teaches us.
I don't think you end up worshiping people. I'm going to push back. I think you end up in a place where you recognize that there are certain things which are ineffable. I've run out of words. I've run out of language. Let's go back to the question. Hang on. I want to go back to the question. I think the question of revelation is where we started, and I think that's worth going back to. And what I want to point out is that the debate we've just had, the conversation we're having here, and the conversation we would have with 10 other rabbis if we had the chance to do this together, is not a new one. Modernity has certainly changed the terms of the conversation. In some ways, made it harder, made it more pointed. But you find in the tradition itself a really very virulent debate over what exactly was revealed on Mount Sinai. I'll just give you a quick second of review, okay? In the rabbinic tradition, well, first of all, in the Bible, it's not entirely clear at all what God revealed on Mount Sinai, whether it was the Bible or the Ten Commandments or whatever it is. The rabbinic tradition took a maximalist position, said all of the written all the written Torah was revealed on Mount Sinai, and all of the oral tradition, that Moses heard every argument that every student would ever ask his teacher, every question that would ever be asked in any school or yeshiva ever, because they wanted to say that the authority of transcendence, the authority of God, applies to the entire rabbinic tradition as well as the oral Torah. So the maximalist position is all of Torah, all of its interpretation, it's all divine. It all comes from God. Then there was a more restricted idea that said just the 5 books of Moses, and all the rest of it is human interpretation, application, imagination as we litigate and as we adjudicate and as we apply the insights of Torah and the laws of Torah to regular life. Then there was a more restricted one that said just the 10 commandments. Just the 10 commandments. The 10 commandments were given by God, and even the rest of the Torah is a midrash on the fundamental principles of the 10 commandments. And then there was the position that Rabbi Gelman articulated, that was articulated by Rosenzweig in his conversation with Buber, that just the first commandment, that all God said to the people of Israel was, Ani Adonai Elohecha, I am the Lord your God who brought you to the land of Egypt. That's all he said. I exist, I have a relationship with you. Now go figure out the rest on your own, basically. And all of Torah and all of halacha, that means all of halacha is a human interpretation of what it means to live in the presence of the divine, of a God and who has a stake in our history. Then there's another.
Sorry, go ahead, Eddie.
I'm having fun. I'm on a roll.
Good, because there's more.
I know. Then the next piece is the tradition that said just the first word. All God said was ani, which means I am. That is, all you need to know is that there is a God in the world. And the God who's willing to break out of God's abscondus, God's hiddenness, to come into the world and say, hello, I'm here. Ani, I exist. And if I exist, how do you have to live your life? How do you have to create a society? How do you have to conduct yourself in the world? Who do you have to be if I, in fact, exist? Ani. And then there's 2 more, which are even more radical. The Ropchitzer Rav, a great Hasidic Rebbe of the 18th century, said all God gave was the first letter of the first word of the first commandment of the 10 commandments. And as you know, the first word is Anochi, I am, and the first letter is an Aleph, and an Aleph simply is, that's right, it's a silent letter, which means there was no word. This is where Rabbi Gelman's position becomes more radical. There was no word. There was just this ineffable, unspeakable, amazing moment of presence. And the people of Israel witnessed it and took to themselves the project, the 4,000-year project of trying to figure out what are the implications What are the ethical implications, the societal implications, the implications of what it means to live with the God who shows up, doesn't even have to say anything. And then finally, you ready for this? When my brothers and I used to sing all the verses of Dayenu at the Pesach Seder, and we used to giggle because some of them were goofy. And one of them in particular, I used to think is the goofiest one of all. It's Ilu hevianu lahar Sinai, velo natan lanu et Torah. You know, God, if you had brought us to Mount Sinai, but not given us the Torah, Dayenu. And we said, oh, that's great. Imagine that. We get to Mount Sinai. Everybody looks up and says, okay, we're here. What's supposed to happen? You're supposed to put a quarter in the slot? I mean, where are you? We're here. And then it turns out I found a beautiful Hasidic, I forgot who it was from, but a beautiful Hasidic commentary on that very verse of the song, which said, no, you see, Ilu hevianu lahar Sinai, if you had brought us to a moment of readiness, if you had brought us for a moment when we were really listening, if you had brought us to a moment when our hearts were open, and our envy and our jealousy and our irritations and our aggravations were all suppressed, and for a moment we were ready to really hear God's voice, Dayenu, that would have been enough. That itself is a revelation, that a human being is ready to accept divine law, divine word. It's like, that moment when a human being is ready to fall in love. That itself is a remarkable development of character. And that itself is, there wasn't anything that was said. We were just ready to listen. Now, all of those positions occur not from modern rabbis. That's all in the ancient tradition, because this was one of the questions of how do you reconcile, as Rabbi Gelman's pointed out, a God who is a God of such of moral profundity and life and death with the words that we have. And all of this debate has to do with the question of what does it mean to absorb the word of God? What does it mean to absorb the word of God? Please.
Yeah, I appreciate, and I'm informed always by what you say, and Sherry, and I understand that for some reason in your own theological development, the experience of Sinai is very important to you, the content of Sinai. For me, it's never been that important. It's the consequence of Sinai, not the content of Sinai, but the consequence. That's why the Rosenzweig quote is so dear to me, because exactly as you've said, it's okay, I'm here, I'm real, and I have something to tell you, but you're going to have to figure it out, okay? This is why the key point to me in understanding Revelation comes outside of Revelation and outside of Judaism. And that is, we need a mechanism, a way, a theory, a philosophical regimen. We need something to be able to interpret what happened at Sinai and to be able to interpret the words of the Torah as they have been recorded, the words that we have. And that mechanism is secular philosophical ethics. It's the philosophy that Aristotle began in the Nicomachean Ethics, and Plato wrote it. And in the Jewish tradition, this reconciliation occurred primarily, Maimonides tried in his way, but he was limited by his time. But like Hermann Cohn, for example, in his attempt to understand, and Mendelssohn also, the relationship between secular ethical thinking and the revelation from God at Sinai. And so for this reason, when we come to a part in the Torah that men should rule over women, there's several ways to handle that. One is the rabbinic way to explain it away. That's not always the rabbinic way, but it's a dominant rabbinic way. The other way is to say, this part is wrong. And you've heard me say this often in our conversation. This part is not a revelation from God in the Torah. It's not. And the way we know that is through external critique of that verse, that you can't universalize the maxim that men, simply because of their maleness, have a right to have power over women. That is wrong. That is morally wrong. And if the Torah supports that view, as it supports the view of slavery, as it supports the view of the abomination of homosexuality, if it supports these things, the Torah is wrong. And our understanding that it's revealed by God is wrong. And forcing people to believe that stuff, which is what fundamentalist orthodoxy does, only drives people who have a brain away from Judaism. And so, for me, the reason that both Aristotle and Maimonides believed that the people who would interpret this were prophets, but they weren't just prophets who got called by God. That's the biblical view. Their view was they were the philosopher kings. They were the ones who had mastered philosophy and who had mastered thinking and who could provide a critique of what we have received. So it's simply wrong to say, well, God revealed everything, we have to do everything. That's just not true. It isn't even right. It's morally abominable. What is true is that using our brain to understand what ethical terms can be universalized, which is how you determine if they're moral. Kant made that point clearly and decisively. Something isn't moral unless everyone should do it, faced with the same circumstances. If that's true, then we have an outside mechanism to critique the Torah. And we say, oh yes, not stealing is true. And there's an argument of why that is true, which has nothing to do with Sinai. So my point is that revelation begins at Sinai, but its most interesting and essential nature happens after Sinai, as people develop their minds and develop independent thinking. And then they return to the Torah and they say, this ancient book is not just some accretion of ancient prejudices, which you can hear in every university campus, in every philosophy of religion 101. It is not that. It's something much deeper than that. It's the first human encounter with the notion that we are not materialistic beings, that we are moral beings.
I deeply appreciate what you said, and I deeply appreciate the moral conclusions. I want to push back on just one point. I think you have overemphasized the necessity of going outside and underestimated the internal critique, internal within the Bible itself, and then internal within the Jewish tradition, right? When Abraham says to God, Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat, shall not the judge of all the earth do justice?
That's
He's
the
saying,
first example. Yep.
yes, that's the point, but that's an internal critique, and that's a systemic precedent for saying, that the ruling that allows for slavery in the book of Exodus contradicts the tradition that every human being is created in the image of God. That the ruling that says that children are punished for the sins of their fathers is then contradicted by the prophet Ezekiel. That then the rabbinic tradition begins and tells us a story that when we crossed the Red Sea and started singing and dancing at the demise of Pharaoh, the angels in heaven sang and danced, and God says, "Shtok, be quiet, my children drown in the sea." I certainly agree with you, Mark, and far be it from me to tell you not to look into the works of Kant and every other great moral genius. But I think that process begins within Torah itself.
Yeah, well, let me just say one word about that. If that were true, and my heart breaks to push back and say, I think everything you say is true about an internal critique, but it's a very, very limited and weak internal critique because it isn't informed by philosophy. And the proof of it is here, let's look at the tradition which took the maximalist view, the Orthodox view. You would think if there was a good, strong internal critique, that women would be allowed in 2021 to read from the Torah in Orthodox Judaism. And it's not true. You would think that there would be a breakthrough in the views toward homosexuality as a legitimate form of love. And it's not true. So I can't go there with you, Eddie. I can't say, look how proud we are that the most religious, the most traditional, the most observant of all Jews are also the most morally enlightened. That is not true. That's just not true. I mean, as the president of the New York Board of Rabbis, I had to deal with as many Orthodox Jewish slumlords as you could shake a stick at. And every time I'd say, what? Is it possible that you could be Orthodox and still steal and oppress from people and oppress people like this? How could you do this?
I'm not disputing that, Mark. It's absolutely what you're
saying. I would expect more from them.
I do.
And we haven't gotten enough from them.
And more from us too.
But there's an internal critique.
I just don't want to make the case that you need to go outside. I think that voice, all right, come on, we disagree. But I think that the voice exists within the tradition. And it's one of the failings of that community that it hasn't made. And there are reasons, there are historical reasons why that community adopted certain things that you and I find so very questionable, because the spirit of the law got drowned in the letter of the law, because pilpul became more important than the deeper moral quest for the. But I think that even within that community, there are those voices that object and argue. And I just wanted to point out that within the community, within the tradition, those voices occur as well. It's not all from Immanuel Kant, although God bless the memory of Immanuel.
Well, yeah. But
also,
let me just ask you, if there was something that had nothing to do with Judaism, would you be so sanguine? I mean, if you were talking to a slave owner before the war, before the Civil War, and said, look, how is it that you can enslave human beings and buy human beings? And they said, well, you don't understand. There were these principles.
But I don't judge the power of a tradition based on a certain class of people whose morality I question. I'm trying to look at the whole corpus.
Not only that, I don't pin it on a voice from God that said these words, that therefore, because people chose to follow them or didn't follow them, are authoritative. It's like and I do believe this, that if there was some moment that was like, as Eddie described so aptly, right, then everything that's been written down is all written down by humans. And some wrote it in a certain sociological circumstance, and some wrote it in a different sociological circumstance. As a result, we don't think all of it works for our sociological circumstances. That's a different conversation.
I'm going to ask us now to take a very abrupt halt, because it's almost Shavuos, and we have to. But so one of the wonderful customs of Shavuot is to eat milchiks. Another custom is to gather on Erev Shavuos to study together. Tell me one custom that you observe, that you cherish about making this holiday special. Sherry, you want to give us a custom that you like? Let's finish with something sweet. So
yes, I love it. So it's a little hard to wrap your head around this holiday in the same way of Pesach and Sukkot that are so full of rituals and excitement. I mean, the sukkah starts to go up and my kids are like so cheering. So what I try to do, which actually is a little inspired, I'm going to add something this year. We have like blintzes and kugel, and we do a full Sunday bar, and we have all kinds of like learning that goes on throughout the couple of days. But based on this conversation, I'm actually going to put a prompt on each of my teenagers' tables that is, how do you believe in God today? And did God speak to you directly? Or something like that. Like, what is your God conversation today? Is it casual? Is it intimate? Is it non-existent? Something like that. And use it as a prompt for the questions and the dialogue of our family meals during the Chag. Because I feel like there's a lot of questions we raise today that could be just, is your relationship with God casual? Is it intimate? And putting it on a card. I actually may put it in their on sticky notes and put them around the dining room, and they can pick which one and pull it off the wall. So a new tradition that may be emerging within the next 48 hours.
Mark, give me a custom that you observe for Shavuos. That was beautiful, Cher.
Well, I'm a blintz eater, and I'm a conflicted blintz eater. The reason I say I'm conflicted is that I have had a lifetime battle with a bunch of things, but one of them is my moral certainty based on the revelation of the Torah, but also by independent philosophical analysis that killing animals to eat them is morally wrong. But I'm not a vegetarian because of my impulse, as you would say, my context, which is that I grew up in a meat and potatoes house in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And to me, a meal isn't a meal without meat. And I've been struggling my whole life. I've gone several years as a vegetarian, and then I became a desertitarian during that time, which was not good for my health. And by eating blintzes on Shavuos, I make an annual resolve that I should do more to be kind to the animal world by killing fewer of them, by forcing people to kill fewer of them to feed me. I know it's right, and I know that eventually I'll get there. But the blintzes for me are not only wonderful, because I love sweet, cheesy things, but they're also a critique. They remind me that, as Tommy once said to me on the day we met, actually, when I was going to move to Florida, and he said, "No, you're not going. I had a dream last night, and God came to me and said, you're going to meet a guy and tell him I'm not through with you here." The blintzes are God's reminder that God isn't through with me yet.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you both. My custom is not a surprise. There are Jews who love praying as their way of spirituality, and Jews who love doing social justice as their way of spirituality, and Jews who love politics as their way of spirituality. I love learning. And this year, like last year, offers the most unique opportunity to do learning this year, the tradition of staying up all night learning. But frankly, you don't have to stay up all night because the stuff will be archived. And what I can do is when I'm finished teaching, I'm going to be teaching for Valley Beth Shalom, first teaching for the Rabbinical Assembly nationally, and then teaching for Valley Beth Shalom. Then I can sit at my computer and I can be in New York, and I can be in Tel Aviv, and I can be in Jerusalem, and I can be in Chicago, and I can be in Atlanta, and I can be in San Francisco, and I'm going to visit all of the rabbis that I so cherish around the country, around the world, and try to get a few minutes of learning from them all. And what a sweet joy that is. So to Rabbi Gelman and to Rabbi Hirsch, thank you for your wonderful contributions to this morning's conversation and debate. Stay well. And to everyone who's listening, following our service, following our Torah study, of course, we have service from Valley Beth Shalom. And following that, Rabbi Silverman's words of Drasha. Tonight, Mincha at 6 o'clock with Yossi Dresner. 9 o'clock, I'll be leading Havdalah. Tomorrow, Minyan in the morning at 8:30. We begin our Shavuot celebration at Valley Beth Shalom at 7 o'clock here online, Facebook, Zoom, and YouTube. Love to have you along. We'll be doing learning. Rabbi Farkas and I will be teaching about homecoming and what home means to the Jewish people, offering Yontif prayers. We'll have Mariv and then make Kiddush together, and then we'll be learning late into the evening as well. You can go online and find all sorts of great learning. Monday, we're on site for davening in the morning. Tuesday, we have to be back on Zoom and YouTube and Facebook because we'll have kids back in the building to celebrate Shavuos in the building. And you can do Yizkor with us online. If you'd like to do Yizkor in person, come in the afternoon at 6 o'clock. Yossi will be doing Mincha, and he'll also be doing Yizkor over again at the Mincha service. We certainly thank you for being with us this morning. Wish you a good Shabbos and a good Yontif.